My dream job was to work with the national parks. Ever since I was a young boy, I always dreamed of being a park ranger. Patrolling campgrounds and chatting with some of the friendly campers, hiking trails to make sure everything was easily maneuverable, and just spending time in nature. Being in nature has always been my way of disconnecting from reality. Whenever things got stressful in life, I would hit the trails or go backpacking for a few days, or rent a campsite in some remote area in the woods. My parents were never supportive of my goals. They would have much rather seen the letters MD after my name, or my face on a billboard advertising towards people who were involved in traffic collisions. Oh well. I put in an application for one of the county parks near my house, not really expecting much out of it. I was fresh out of high school, no college experience yet, flipping hamburgers and dealing with people who find a reason to complain and everything. So there was no harm at all in putting out applications. I pulled up a Google Map directory of every local, state, county, and national park in my state, California, and submitted applications whenever I saw openings. I even called a few parks that I really liked to see if they had any positions available, but I hadn't had any luck for months. My bank account was starting to dwindle as a result of constant maintenance on my '03 Civic, which had been put through more than the manufacturer could have ever designed the cars to experience, and I was starting to stress. I would pinch my pennies together at gas stations, skip meals altogether when I didn't have anything readily available at home, and try to cruise at 55 on the freeways to be more efficient with what little fuel I had. I definitely didn't expect this to be my reality after high school, but I guess I should have. My parents kicked me out the minute they found out that I was gay, and I was left living in my car for months until I found someone who would let me crash on their couch. It was really mentally challenging, just trying to convince myself to keep going through everything, but I had this gut feeling that things would work out eventually. I know it sounds kind of weird, but this life wasn't half bad. I mean, I saved a fair bit of money on rent because Dylan let me sleep on his couch at night for free. I took my Civic with me wherever I drove, to the beaches, the forest and mountains east, the deserts. Sleeping in the car wasn't too bad. I wasn't exactly the most picky camper in the world, and I knew that it was cheaper than renting a hotel every night. Eventually, I'd have loved to get a van or an SUV to have more room, but for now, the rusty bucket of problems we call a Civic would have to work. I remember the day that I got the email. I had just checked my bank account balance to see that I had $7.80 left. I was a few thousand miles over when I should have gotten my oil changed, and my front brakes were squeaking again, most likely as a result of the axle leaking grease and corroding them. Like I said, rusty bucket of problems. An email was in my inbox that read, "National Park Service, immediately hiring full-time ranger. Must be willing to relocate. Base salary $65,000. Respond for info." I had never been a religious lad, but this felt like a godsend. I had never seen more than $5,000 in my bank account at one time, let alone $65,000 in a year, as a base salary. Of course, I had to reply to them and send a message that read, "Hey there, I'm Jake, a wilderness enthusiast based in California. I would love to learn more about your opening with the National Park Service. I am willing to relocate wherever, although it might take time for me to get there. Let me know if you would like to interview me." I attached a copy of my resume, which had a fair bit of information that would have proved I was the right candidate for the job. Ample experience in the wilderness, knowledge on most survival skills, excellent physical shape, and good work ethic. I had beefed up my resume as much as possible. I don't know if I would have been able to forgive myself if they said I was unqualified or didn't get the position. That wouldn't have been an issue though. About 24 hours later, I got a response from a woman by the name of Abigail, inviting me to do a tele-interview a day later. I started to feel giddy with excitement at the prospect of finally landing my dream job with the National Park Service. Not only that, but having accommodation, stable income, and being able to spend time surrounded by the beauty of nature is all I could ask for in life. I set a reminder on my laptop that I had an interview, and hastily jotted down the number that she said she would be calling me from. I tried so hard to focus at work that day, but it felt like I was stumbling over orders and making careless mistakes again and again. Every time I slipped up, the manager walked over and yelled at me, and then muttered to herself in Spanish and walked away. I was so close to quitting on the spot, but something told me to hold off just a bit longer, until I knew for sure if I had gotten the new job yet. Fast forward to the next day. Abigail called me about 5 minutes late. She asked me pretty basic questions. My past work experience, my work ethic. Asked me to describe some of the experiences I have had in the wilderness and what knowledge I can bring to the team. I answered her questions honestly and very thoughtfully, making sure to reference real-world scenarios wherever possible, so she didn't think I was bluffing with all the experience I'd claimed to have. It seemed to be going great, and I was certain that I would get the position. I was smiling wider than I had smiled in months when she asked me the question that sticks with me to this day. Are you afraid of what lurks in the shadows of the trees at night, Jake? It took me a minute to figure out how to respond to this. I didn't expect her to ask me that. When I was going over interview questions the night before, I planned just about everything out, even some follow-up questions to ask her about the position that would show her how interested I am. I had not prepared for this. I had never been afraid of the woods or any nature at all. I had no reason to be. I knew everything there was to know about defending myself. I could use a knife pretty well, was a great aim with a crossbow, and even had made my own bows before out of materials in the woods. I didn't exactly believe in supernatural beings or demonic entities, so there is no reason to be afraid. But still, her question unsettled me a little bit. I tried to convince myself that it was just a joke, and she wasn't serious. But the lack of laughter matching my nervous laughter shot that theory down pretty quickly. I took a deep breath and then responded. I've never been afraid of the shadows and the trees. I do just fine in the wilderness. I've never been in a situation where I feel like I lost control. Her response sent chills up my spine. I reckon you should be, honey. She's always watching, even if it feels like she left. No matter how far you go, she'll always be a few steps behind you. She's always smiling too. If you dare ignore... Abigail cut off as she began talking to someone else on her end of the line, assumingly a coworker or another park ranger. She eventually put herself on mute, and I spent a few moments processing what had happened. Who is she? What happens if you ignore her? I felt a bit uneasy, but then realized that Abigail works with the parks. I feel like to work with the MPS, you have to be at least a little bit crazy. Not many people would want to give up the luxuries of fast internet, guaranteed electricity, and a healthy social life to live alone in the middle of the woods, patrolling and yelling at people who started fires outside of fire pits. Even if you weren't crazy getting in, chances are by the time you retire, you'll have a therapist on speed dial. I tried to chalk it up to being that, an older lady who was starting to lose her mind, and brushed it off as no big deal. Just as I came to my conclusion, I heard Abigail's voice on the other end of the line again. Congratulations, Jake. You're perfect for the position. we're going to send you a ticket for your plane that we'll be embarking to Alaska. This starts in Denali National Park in 3 days. Do you have any more questions? I froze for a minute. I was going to Alaska in 3 days. This moment was honestly the happiest of my life thus far. A realization that everything I had dreamed of was starting to fall into place. I was likely going to be surrounded by millions of trees, millions of acres of land, and one of the most beautiful landscapes the world has to offer. It had been my dream to visit Alaska one day, and now I got to live there and get paid to do so. But I had to find more out. I wanted to know what she meant earlier about the girl who watches you, even though I'm almost positive it was nothing. I wanted to hear it from her, just to ease my racing mind. I decided to start with a pretty general question. What should I bring with me? I asked, and she responded quickly. Just your clothing and anything you might want in your station. Your phone, a laptop and charger, winter clothing, a few decorations or memories from home, any other weird gadgets that you love, and maybe a pocket knife. We'll provide everything else you need. I didn't exactly have a lot to my name, aside from my car and a few boxes of crap that I had collected over the years, so I figured I would pack light. I had to do a bit of shopping for winter clothing, as it's never cold enough to warrant heavy jackets in Southern California. But that would be a lot easier when I had the couple hundreds of dollars my car was worth in pocket. I felt like we were comfortable enough with each other, so I asked the question. You said something earlier about a woman who watches you. I asked hesitantly, half expecting her to hang up on me and deny me the job right then and there. But she chuckled and responded, Oh, sorry about that. Sometimes my brain acts all wonky with these interviews. She cleared her throat and continued, It was just one of those moments, nothing to be afraid about. That explanation resonated with me, and I thanked her for her time and I hung up. I could hardly sleep at night. Anticipation, my flight and vivid dreams about the forest, the wildlife, the life as a ranger filled my thoughts constantly. One night it got so hard, I had to take Benadryl just to make myself drowsy enough to get a few hours of shut-eye. It was the day of the flight. Dylan helped me with my bags and drove me to the airport. I decided I would give him the rest of the money that I had, as I was sure there wouldn't be any convenience stores where I was heading, and left him everything I couldn't take with me. I don't know if he was just taking it so I didn't have to lug it down to Goodwill, or deal with the horror commonly known as Facebook Marketplace, but I appreciated it either way. I entered the terminal, scanned my boarding pass and checked my duffel bags, and carried a pack with me that had all my technology. My crappy point-and-shoot camera that I had saved for years, my laptop, my cell phone with contacts of the few people I wanted to remain close with, and a few notebooks because I loved writing. Of course, I had all my hiking gear packed, even though they said they would provide me with gear of my own when I got there. It was too difficult to part with these shoes and poles and things that had kept me going for so many years when I had nothing else to look forward to. I boarded my plane, threw my backpack in the overhead stowaway bin, and prepared for takeoff. This was it. The moment that my entire life's hoping and working had culminated to. Every struggle I had, every moment of doubt whether I wanted to keep pushing on through the poverty and pain was gone. My dreams were about to become a reality. I braced myself for takeoff, and shut my eyes to get a little bit of rest while the plane began its 6-hour journey towards Alaska. The plane touched down at Anchorage International, and it would be a short drive to get to the park where I would be stationed. I was greeted by a friendly face who I assumed to be Abigail. She was a frail woman, most likely in her late 50s, but had this fire in her eyes. She didn't look tough, but I had to assume she was a lot stronger than her appearance put on. Behind her was a man about my height and a little more muscular. I assumed he would be training me, or working with me at my post. Neither of them said much, other than exchanging basic pleasantries, and I was instructed to follow her to the van that they had arranged for her transportation. The minute I stepped foot out of the airport, I was in shock. Alaska was absolutely beautiful. I had seen pictures of it before, watched a few shows on television when I used to have cable, and of course seen plenty of YouTube videos that people put out there. But it's just so much more incredible in person. The trees in the distance, the chilly air that just felt so much fresher than the city air. The dynamic of people in the area all felt so surreal. It truly felt like home. Home. Something I really needed at that point in my life. We got in the van, a small white transit that definitely showed some signs of use, that headed north, towards Denali National Park. I sat next to the muscular man, whose name I learned to be Zeke. Abigail had left a bit earlier. I guess it was just me and Zeke right now, and the person driving the van who had a weird love for classical music. I put one of my earbuds in, knowing that I probably wouldn't get a lot of time to listen to music during orientation, and enjoyed the drive as the sun started to sleepily duck down under the huge snow-capped mountains to my right. Eventually, we got to the ranger station. It was a small building, but from the outside it looked very inviting. The walls were made of wood and the lights had a yellowish glow to them. There were windows on all sides, and a little check-in desk for those who were driving through. Surrounding the ranger station were towering green trees which I recognized to be primarily white spruce. And to the left a bit there was a building that looked like some form of bathroom connected to a garage. I had gotten to know Zeke a bit on the ride up. He was pretty quiet, but we had a lot of similarities. He was only a few years older than I was, and had also been kicked out of his house by his family, although he wouldn't tell me why. Zeke grew up in Montana, in a small town near Glacier National Park, and fell in love with the surroundings. He told me he had been working for the national parks for a year now, and was bumped up to one of the lead positions at Denali. I really felt like I could get along with Zeke, although there was something a bit off about him. It felt like he was hiding something. It had to have been the voice. It sounded as if there was some underlying fear or anxiety in his tone. Oh well, he seemed to be a really good person, and I'd be working with him indefinitely, so there was an obligation to get along to some extent. If something happened to one of us, we had to be able to depend on the other for help. I wasn't used to this, and I knew it wouldn't come as easy as the textbooks make it feel, but it was something that I could work towards. As the van pulled up to the garage next to the facilities, I motioned to get out, but Zeke reached over me and pulled the door shut once more. "You're not stopping here," he said with a grin. "You'll be stationed in a tower about 5 miles north, in the forest. Everything you need should be there. A hunting rifle, clothing, gear, your phone and the numbers that you may need to call, and a handbook with all the information that you'll need for now." He paused for a moment and then continued. "I know it sounds silly, but make sure you read every page in the handbook. It's not that long, and the last guy who didn't." I could see a look of regret on Zeke's face as he realized that he had shared too much. Well, he had to be replaced somehow, and that's why you're here. It must have been evident that I had a look of shock on my face. I wish I had known this before I signed up for the position, but I guess it made sense. You're working in a remote area in the wilderness. All kinds of wildlife could cut your life short. If you don't know everything there is to know about the area, you could be caught with your pants down with a hungry bear looking right up at you, so to speak. I smiled and said, "I'll read it all, don't worry." The expression on his face appeared genuine, and Zeke waved as he jumped out of the van and headed towards the ranger station. I adjusted around a bit, and put my feet up against the vacant left side of the van. The driver didn't say a thing, and just kept on driving. As the forest got denser and denser, the road felt bumpier and bumpier. Even though it didn't exactly feel like a God-sent cab ride, I felt like I was in heaven. Surrounded by trees, people who also love nature. And I was making more money doing this than I would have made in 3 years at McDonald's. Maybe this is the closest to heaven I'll ever be. Just as I was starting to drift into sleep, I saw a huge tower in the distance. It was probably 85 feet tall, and had a metal staircase that wrapped around the tower frame and led into a cabin, supposedly where I was to sleep and watch from. The driver pulled off a bit, got out of the car and opened my door. I jumped out as well, and gave my legs a moment to adjust to standing up again, after hours of riding in a bumpy van. "There you go, lad. You got about a quarter-mile walk to the tower, through the forest to the right." He motioned his arm towards a huge expanse of trees that was surrounding the tower. It appeared as if some of the trees were taller than the tower itself. It was absolutely beautiful. I thanked him, shook his hand, put my gloves on, and began to hike towards my new home. The tower itself was amazing. It looked relatively new. The only evidence that anyone had lived in it before were the footprints gathered around the base of the steps. As I ascended the metal staircase that led into the sky, I couldn't help but gawk at the beautiful expanse of forest that surrounded me. For miles and miles, all I could see were towering trees, mountains, and there was a small lake a bit to the west. Considering the only light that was guiding me at this point was that from the full moon and the stars that shone in the sky, it was amazing how well I could see. It was such a contrast from the mundane city views that I had grown to abhor, and beat any hike or backpacking trip I had ever done by a long shot. A bright orange light helped me find the door. There were windows on 3 of the 4 sides of the tower, the 4th being the wall my bed was up against. When I entered the small cabin, there was a gunmetal filing cabinet and a wooden desk right next to the bed, and a locker which I presumed to hold all of my new belongings and a rifle. Around the unit were posters from various parks in Alaska, a few pictures of the staff team, and little notes about things you can see from each window. On the wooden desk was a handbook, assumingly the one I was informed about earlier. There was a black phone connected to a landline, and a little memo pad that was turned upside down. I spent a few hours reading the handbook, nothing out of the ordinary. It outlined what I was supposed to be doing, some of these standard operating procedures for common events, and gave me a breakdown of the wildlife and the plants that I would likely encounter. There was a map on one of the last pages that showed my tower in relation to the other towers throughout the park and the headquarters Zeke got dropped off at. For the most part, I was just fire watching and patrolling for now. Every 2 days, I would hike a trail nearby my station and make sure that no fallen logs or huge grizzly corpses stopped trekkers and trucks from exploring the park. There is a page that detailed some of the things more experienced rangers got to do. Experiment with local research teams, assessing weather conditions, tagging and tracking animals through the forest, and cutting unhealthy trees into firewood to be used at the ranger station and sold in the nearest town to benefit the forest. I assumed that there would be tours as well, but no mention of those was in the handbook. I was about to turn away when I remembered that there was a little memo pad right next to me. It looked pretty worn down. The cover was entirely faded when I turned it over, except for big words on the front that read, 5 most important things. I assumed that it was general notes on things that were happening nearby in real time. The handbook was likely a bit outdated, and the notebook allowed rangers to write down what was happening and leave reminders on current events that any new hirees would need to know. But when I flipped to the first page, I felt a cold shiver run down my spine through my body. In chicken scratch handwriting, it read, 1. You work alone. I glanced around the room and didn't see anyone else with me. I figured that I would be working alone when I got to the park and Zeke got out, but it felt so dark. The writing felt like it was written as a warning of sorts, in case somebody else tried to pretend they worked there. Is it possible that some of the local backpackers tried to pretend to work with the parks in order to steal, or worse? I flipped the page, and once again, that shiver ran down my spine as I read the handwritten words. 2. She will not help you. I flipped the page again, anxiously glancing around the room, trying to figure out who she was. 3. If you hear her crying, run. I practically ripped the page off the memo pad as I flipped again to see what was on the following page. 4. If you see her, it's too late. I slammed the book against the counter and started pacing around the room. I knew that I was getting myself into a job that could be dangerous. But who was she? What kind of task was I really doing here, aside from watching for fires and hiking trails? I really wanted to know more, and soon. But I was starting to get tired, and wouldn't be able to get very far with the intense jet lag and the lack of sleep recently. I took off my shirt and boots, and set my backpack down next to the cot that I had been sleeping in. It was actually quite comfortable, at least more comfortable than sleeping on a couch had been. I decided to sleep with a utility belt on, a knife, flashlight, and a 5.7 pistol that I had found in the locker, just in case. All of this would blow over in the morning, when I got answers, I'm sure. At least, that's what I told myself, as I tossed and turned in bed for 20 minutes, trying to calm my nerves. I awoke to the sound of rain pattering against the roof of the tower. Great, I thought. I won't be able to hike down to the station in this weather. I got up, cleared my eyes and blew my nose, and looked out the window. There was a heavy fog surrounding the tower, and I could barely see the trees closest to me, let alone the lake or the ranger station. I decided to look through the handbook one last time, and see if I could find any phone numbers to the ranger station. When I looked through the night before, I found no mention of the phone at all, and no idea how to reach others in case of emergencies. I guess it's very possible that I was too groggy and I had missed a key detail. I started walking towards the wooden desk when I froze. Someone was coming up my tower. I instinctively put my hand on my hip, where my 5.7 was stored, and was ready to pull it out and fire. Just as I had started to raise the gun, I saw a young woman's face in the window. She was wearing typical ranger attire, a heavy snow jacket, cargo pants, heavy boots. She had a utility belt on as well, with a knife and a gun similar to mine on her waist. I, laughing at my stupidity for almost killing a fellow ranger, put the gun back in its holster and opened the door. "Hey, I'm Autumn. I just wanted to say hi to the new guy," she blushed, and pointed out through my window, towards where the entrance to the park would have been. "Most of the times you can find me at the main headquarters. Sometimes I like to work with the new recruits until they're comfortable with their duties. If you want, I can take you on a little tour, when the weather clears up a bit." She was soaking wet. Her hair looked fresh out of the shower. She had to have trekked at least 5 miles to get here, through heavy rain and terrible conditions. There was no way I would say no to letting her stay a bit. Plus, it was starting to get colder. If she had got caught out while it was snowing with soaked clothing, chances are it wouldn't end well. "You can stay here for a bit if you'd like. I just woke up a few minutes ago. I was looking for a manual on how to use the phone, because I had a couple of questions. I can't find any phone numbers or any information about how to contact the headquarters. I said, pointing towards the phone. She chuckled and replied, "Oh, those phones don't work. They're really just in a static at this point. The lines used to be up and running, but now they're as good as dead. You'd have to walk down to the headquarters to ask, but since I'm here, you may as well ask me." I felt embarrassed to ask about the notes in the notepad, so I quickly put together a random thought. "What do we do about getting food here? Do they do supply runs to resupply the towers? Or do you have to walk to pick up your own?" I mean, it wasn't a bad question at all. Besides, I was getting hungry and couldn't find any food around the room. "They'll bring it by in a few hours," she said, smiling. "It's not exactly what I would call comfort food, but it fills the stomach and gives you the energy you need to keep trekking." I smiled, thinking back to all the times that I had gone hungry because I couldn't afford to eat. I wasn't eager to tell Autumn my entire life story, so I stayed silent. But the prospect of getting food handed to me, and decent, livable food, made me livid with excitement. "By the way, HQ told me to tell you that there was an incident on one of the trails not too far from here. Since it's in your territory, they want you to check it out. Something about a boulder that's obstructing the path. I guess it became dislodged with the rain and rolled down the hill." I didn't realize how long it had been raining. I guess it had to have started while I was sleeping, since there was a steady pour by the time that I awoke. "I'll check it out when the weather clears up. Do you know where it is?" "It's west of here. If you look on the map in your handbook, you'll see a trail called Boulder Ridge Loop. It's a 7-mile loop trail that goes around a mountain." I laughed. "Ironic, huh? The boulder destroyed the Boulder Ridge Loop. Do you know exactly how much more rain we're going to get tonight?" She shook her head. "Not sure, to be honest. The chances are, it'll get light for a few hours, and then start raining pretty heavily again. If I were you, when it starts to ease, I would head out as fast as you can, and try to assess what happened." She paused for a moment and then continued, "I'd be more than happy to tag along if you'd like the company. To help. Plus, it might be difficult to determine the trailheads on your first full day." "Yeah, that sounds great. I'm going to get changed and start getting ready, so we can leave in an instant." She started walking towards the door and said, "I'll wait near the trailhead. Don't dilly-dally too long, buddy." She gave me a friendly wave and jogged down the metal steps. Autumn seemed like a nice person. She was pretty attractive, friendly, and seemed knowledgeable. I put on a heavy rain jacket that was in my locker when I realized something. I sprinted over to the desk and grabbed the memo pad, turning back to page 1. I traced these scratched letters with my fingertip. 1. You work alone. I flipped the page again. 2. She will not help you. I started to panic. I couldn't go out with her. I had already broken 2 of the rules that were in the memo pad. There was no way for me to reach the ranger station to ask them for clarification. I tried to be rational. Maybe she doesn't work with me, and she's just telling me my duties, I thought, trying to alleviate the anxiety from my mind. But it didn't help at all. I spent about an hour pacing back and forth, until I noticed that the rain had started to lighten up. I began to pace faster and faster, looking through drawer upon drawer, trying to find something that could help me out. Maybe a mobile phone or a map so I could find the trail myself, or keys to some truck that was out of plain sight nearby. I couldn't find anything. Hours and hours passed until I noticed that the sky was getting darker and darker. God dang it, I thought to myself. I didn't get a chance to do anything today except worry. I turned the light on with the switch in the cabin, and went back over to look through the handbook, once again hoping that I missed something that would help me in this situation, but I found nothing new. I looked outside and could see nothing once again. There was a heavy fog all around the tower, and it was pitch black. It must have been at least 10 p.m. I was considering calling it a night and trying to get some sleep when I heard a faint voice call out from the bottom of the tower. Hey, are you coming? Oh god, she's back, I thought to myself. I had the pistol on my waist, but grabbed a hunting rifle. Something was very off about this place, about Autumn. At first, I thought I could trust her, but at this point, I didn't know if I could trust anybody. I started to crawl slowly towards the door. I put my back against the thin frame of metal that separated the door and the wide glass window, and I peered out. I saw Autumn standing at the base of the tower, staring up at me. Her eyes were wide as saucers, and she was smiling. Not your typical smile. The smile was dark, twisted, scary. It didn't quiver one bit, and she didn't lose her gaze once, even when I looked away. Hello? I heard her call out. I peeked again and she was now looking to the left, no longer right at me. I reached for the door, and slowly creaked it open when I heard it. I heard her begin wailing. Not your typical, I stubbed my toe on a coffee table wail. Her screams were piercing. It was impossible to think straight. Even the constant pour of rain couldn't drown out her wailing. I remembered the third number on the memo pad and began to shake. 3. If you hear her crying, run. I swung open the door and started to run down, when her gaze immediately locked onto mine. Her eyes had turned pure white, and she immediately stopped wailing and smiled once more. Saliva dripped down her teeth, and she began to laugh as she locked her eyes with mine. As if it wasn't bad enough, blood began to pour out of her eyes. I'm not talking a little bit. It was running down her face and collecting in the collar of her ranger jacket. Her once beautiful hair was beginning to fall out by the second, and she began to tremble uncontrollably, as if she was about to explode. 4. If she sees you, it's too late. In a split second, I drew my hunting rifle. She began to sprint up the stairs, faster than any animal I had ever encountered. Her steps were effortless and didn't stumble one bit. I immediately aimed at her and fired. A bullet hit her right in the chest, and I saw her smiling corpse fall through the cracks between the metal stabs. A pool of blood erupted from her body, and she lay motionless. I sprinted back into the tower, leaving my rifle on the deck, and slammed the door shut. With all the strength I had left, I pushed the filing cabinet against the metal cabin door, and immediately collapsed against the cold metal, as I listened to the rain drum against the roof of my tower. I was in shock, drained, exhausted, confused, and afraid. I don't know what that thing was, but it would bother me no more. I felt a wave of relief rush over me. All I had to do was make it to the morning. I could get to the ranger headquarters and get the heck out of this place, out of this cursed forest, out of this crappy metal tower, away from this demonic creature that called itself Autumn. That brings us to the present moment. I'm sitting here, phone in my hand, writing this up on my notepad app. However, I need to check something. I remembered the title of the memo pad said that there weren't 4 things, but 5. I glanced over at the title of the memo pad. As I expected, it read, 5 most important things. I thumbed through the pages. 1. You work alone. 2. She will not help you. 3. If you hear her crying, run. 4. If she sees you, it's too late. I paused for a moment, and then turned the page once more. Simultaneously, as I turned the page, I heard that familiar pounding of feet sprinting up the stairs. Heavy, heavy feet. And the sobbing was back, somehow twice as loud as it was before. I looked at the words on page 5, and dropped the memo pad to the floor in fear. 5. Do not try to kill her under any condition. She does not die.